Hello everyone and welcome. We are delighted to be joining you at the International Floriculture Expo in 2020. I am Dr. Louise Valentine, the Director of Kent State University School of Fashion. We are delighted to be recognised as one of the top 25 in the world, and within the United States we have consistently ranked number 3 for fashion merchandising and number 4 in the United States for fashion design. What we hope to do today is to share with you our love, our passion, our intrigue for fashion. And of course, it naturally connects with florals and with flowers. There's so much that we can share with you, from the literal in terms of how flowers have been used within fashion design, to perhaps some of the more abstract in terms of the work that's going on within biodesign at this moment, which is really bringing forth a new generation of designers for us within fashion. Pollination really is where all of that's coming from, that wonderful intersection between one subject and another, and what happens when a team, an interdisciplinary team of people come together. And so we want to share with you a little as to how that's affecting our work within fashion design and merchandising, aka the business of fashion, and how we are using that to just navigate through what has been a wildly unusual year, 2020, but also helping us navigate the next 5 years with our vision and what we see are the biggest challenges for us within higher education, but also in support of fashion as an industry itself. Let's see. Some of the things that come to my mind that have brought me great joy over the year are the works of British designer Alexander McQueen, and just the abstract that he brought, the imagination, the guts, the boldness that he had within his fashion design. Or again, when I think of flowers and fashion, I think of the work of Lady Gaga and her eccentric nature and what she brought with costume and music to our world of culture. We know that within the fashion industry and fashion design and merchandising education, there are 3 major challenges for us. Sustainability, how we can really take responsibility for the ethics that underpin our discipline and how we educate ourselves and our young designers' minds when they come into our care. We look at equality and diversity. What does it mean to lead with inclusivity within any business these days? And for fashion, that's a big one for us. What does it look like? Well, we're asking us, ourselves as a team, and also you today to join with us to really explore what that means. Because we believe that that's something in any business right now that we have to think long and hard about. And it's about asking the right questions. It's also about listening and about having new conversations, which is why we're so delighted to be here with you today. I think that there is really no way that we would want to do this on our own. So I've invited colleagues to share with you and a little bit of who we are, but also to facilitate a conversation, because ultimately we don't see this as being something that we do on our own. The change, I mean, we don't want to change on our own. So I'm going to invite some of my colleagues to come up and introduce themselves. And so to begin our conversation, let me welcome Professor Linda Mcdaniel, one of our fashion design leads in the School of Fashion. Linda.
Thank you, Louise. It's exciting to be here. Florals and fashion, I think, have always connected. Flowers is something that inspire. Nature is something that inspire a lot of design process, whether it be through biomimicry or just the beauty in itself through a print or a shape to take part and form the garment. So for us, one of the areas where we've seen the floral inspiration come to our students is in a project that we do each year called the Botanical Garden Project, where we work with the botanical gardens to do a project around orchids. This is also our opportunity to introduce our students to technology and the use of technology to represent flowers. And so in many ways, we can think of technology and nature as some kind of a contradiction and maybe not a natural combination. But a lot of the time, the way technology can combine with such an amazing inspiration gives us possibilities to see new things.
Well, I wonder if I can ask you to just tell us a little bit more about that idea of bringing different people together to spark innovation. And I know that one of the projects that you've led very successfully over the last 7 years has been our hackathon. And so can you just talk about how you have just ignited innovation and partnership through the idea of the hackathon?
Yes, so the Fashion Tech Hackathon happens annually, and we invite students from all across the country, and we've had participants from Canada. Regardless of major, anyone is invited. We realize that a lot of the time it's in the conversations with people from different areas that new ideas and innovations come up. So when you put a fashion designer together with a business person, together with someone from robotics, maybe someone from agriculture, and you get all of them to start talking and discussing ideas, a lot of things can happen. And so these students have come up with a lot of creative solutions. They have one weekend to work, and we interact with industry for mentorship, for sponsorship, and that helps bring some new ideas to the table as well.
I think it's really important because our vision as a School of Fashion here at Kent State University is to empower an ecosystem of socially responsible and inventive fashion thinkers. We can only do that by doing things differently. And one of our main routes to do that is to be purposefully engaging with people that we don't know, the unusual suspects, so that we can really listen to what other knowledge and insights and ways of doing things can help us grow in terms of the teachings that we offer, the business models that we are helping to deliver on behalf of the industry, and also how we work with the industry ourselves. And so that talks really to how we as a brand are looking to do things differently to make sure that innovation is very much about being bold, about accepting that we don't have all of the answers, but we trust that the questions that we're asking are going to take us to that place. On that note, I'm going to invite Professor Lorne Copeland to join us, who leads on a whole range of work, but really within the marketing side for fashion within the school. Lorne.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Lorne Copeland, and my focus is really on sustainability and how we can use social media and different technologies to encourage sustainable practices among consumers. And one of the most interesting things that has been going on during this global pandemic is the uptick in social media use. And so in order for businesses to connect with consumers, they're having to utilize these online tools even more than they were before. Mobile use was up, and it's up even more than ever before. And we expect about $3 trillion of sales in 2020 in online purchases. So the consumer is moving online. The consumer wants the business to connect with them. And so as sustainable apparel producers, businesses, manufacturers, we have to find ways in which we can get the message to our consumers in these online platforms about how we are creating these products, how these products are going to impact the environment around us, as well as the people around us, and how we can utilize the tools of peer-to-peer influence in these new business environments that we didn't necessarily think about before this whole pandemic has come about. And so people are really looking about ways to self-improve, to self-reflect, and to really spending time at home with their families and connecting with people in online mediums in more and more ways. And that's what they're doing also in their shopping intentions, is how do we be more purposeful in what we're buying and what purpose is that serving us in our daily life.
One of the things that is intriguing us as a school, but also the industry worldwide, is actually just the social consciousness of this next generation. They have an ethical and moral compass that is very strong. And so I wonder whether you can say a little bit about just how we as an education and the industry is changing when it comes to marketing, because that talks to values. So the values are changing and we see those. How do we respond to that, Lorne? What are your observations so far?
What I'm seeing with these younger consumers is that it is not just about the 4 Ps anymore. There's now a 5th P. So what was price, product, place, and promotion those are all still important, but we also have to consider the promise. So what is your brand standing for? And how are you making sure that you're being transparent with your consumers? These younger generations, they're more concerned about not just the price of a garment, but what it stands for and how they can display what their beliefs are through product on social media to their friends. So they're wanting to create conversations, they're wanting to create experiences and not just consume products. And so that's a way that they're continuing the conversation about their shopping experiences online and in store with their friends. And so they're looking for something that provides longevity and also something that is making the world a better place, because I believe they realize that, you know, what is happening now is going to impact them and future generations. So their children, their children's children, and they're very concerned about what the future is going to look like for them. And so they're really starting to change how they're spending their dollars and where they're putting their money, and what brands they're using. So it's very hard to get this generation, Gen Z and millennials, to become loyal because they want to make sure that you're actually doing what you say you're doing and you're fully transparent in the entire process.
I think that's a big change for all of us to take into consideration. But it's not just at the Gen Z level. We look around at some of the big companies within the US and we see, for example, the work of Kenneth Cole and the mental health initiative that he launched just in May this year. And we see that that's taking the social element of a business and having it as a small aspect for it to become up central as they take the business forward. So that notion of well-being that was something that was maybe a social responsibility is now a social purpose, a social promise, maybe perhaps in your words, Lorne.
That idea of well-being is something that has definitely become even more prominent with the COVID-19 pandemic. They are wanting to know that brands care about them, that they align their values with their customers, that they're not just there for a purchase, but they're there for a lifestyle, and that they're going to support the lifestyle that these newer generations are looking for. And also that they're gaining an experience that they can talk about it in online platforms and share with their friends and have something that they can make a story about and look back and reflect and continue to evolve their online presence.
And I think that issue of well-being really connects too with actually what we see within fashion design itself. You look at some of the technologies and the Internet of Things and how we are designing for health, for example, and how some of the material developments, Linda, are coming in to really change the face of fashion design. So that notion of well-being does seem to cut across the floral industry, the fashion industry, in terms of the business of fashion, as well as the design of fashion. I think there is so much to take in as to how much change has happened this year. And I read somewhere that the changes that we experience in 5 months globally is something that we normally experience within 5 years. So let's pick up on that point that you made, Kim, in terms of how we conduct business is changing. Because I find that fascinating. If we take fashion and our industry and education, we can see that our products aren't changing or what we're delivering. But the context, the process with which we're delivering that is changing, that's there. And I think that's a really important point to make, in that how will we respond? What will we keep? What will we allow ourselves to bin that was now no longer purposeful in this time where we are much more digital? And I think it's a question that the fashion and the floral industries will be asking each other, because there's so much more interaction and not just transaction happening via digital. And if we're honest, as an industry with fashion, we relied on the transaction. It did very much linger on just consumption that's there. And I think that one observation we might want to consider a little longer is actually, what does it mean to be interactive with people as we go take this forward? I am fascinated, and was utterly fascinated when I visited Paris in January of this year and had the privilege of going to a haute couture show at the Fashion Week. because you could see the florals on two levels. One, you could see how they were used extravagantly in part of the fashion runway. So when people were welcomed to watch the fashion show, the abundance and the decadence of flowers that were part of that experience in itself, and how that worked with music and lighting and just celebrating the culture of both Paris and Iran at that time. And then, of course, you saw the literal florals within the decadent haute couture garments that were being shown. And I think that they are still true. And there are two things that we must consider. One, just how a clashing of cultures can bring innovation to how we think about things. Paris, I think, is the main bit that was there, and just the notion of the runway. The fashion runway is completely changed. And so I wonder, how can we share some of our experiences or the observations we've made in terms of the changing nature of fashion runways for the floral industry? What is the tradition of the floral industry as we experience it?
I will say that, runway shows, especially because of the pandemic, but prior to the pandemic, there was much more online interaction where a runway show could be broadcast all around the world in real time. And so if you're considering sustainability and you're not trying to create as much waste, there are ways to digitally create these experiences, including flowers, in online settings where you're not necessarily having to waste all these real flowers, but you can still get the emotion and the feeling of what flowers can bring to a situation without actually having to cut them down or take up land to grow them and whatnot. And so I think as we move towards a more digital space, there's more opportunity for us to collaborate and combine different industries in innovative ways that we haven't seen before.
So one of the challenges for us within education as we look to technology in the virtual side is cost. And again, we had our first virtual fashion show this year, and it's something that we'd like to continue with. And so maybe this is time to look at the issue of investment and how we're thinking about doing that, or with the priorities of sustainability and digitization, and also equity and diversity and inclusivity. Can I invite you just to share with us just how you see the future on those terms and what we might be learning from this summer to take forward?
Fashion shows have had to rethink completely how they do things, mainly because we don't have our audience face to face anymore, but a virtual audience. And all runway shows have had to stop and think virtually. And now all of a sudden, the runway shows is not just a broadcast of models walking down the catwalk, but they've also started looking at the story behind the garments, the story of the making, the process. And from listening to Business of Fashion and some of these people who've watched fashion shows for 40 years actually start appreciating a whole different side to the runway. Or what is fashion? It's more than the dolled up model walking down the runway. It's also the maker and the story behind the garments. And so as fashion industry has to stop and think sustainably, this is a great way to connect to the whole process.
I'm Ann Walter, and I'm the director of our New York City Study Away location. So I am, as you can guess, based in New York City, but I work quite closely with my partners on main campus, traveling to visit them, spending time on video conference, even before the pandemic. And a big part of what I do is connect what we do at the school with what's going on in the industry. And one of the things to add on to what Linda's saying is the New York City Fashion Week has shifted incredibly. This September week is the first big week, women's fashion, women's kind of dictating what happens in everything else. And I read a statistic that in the shows that are physically happening has reduced from something like 160 to 40 physical shows. So everyone is looking at how do we shift in this new space that's still an important week, it's still meaningful. And I think people are exploring these digital options, which allows this whole other layer, behind the scenes, stories, details, things that you could never share in a traditional model. So one of the biggest things I'm seeing is that the industry overall is shifting in a huge way, and digitization was coming to the industry. The fashion industry, from how it may look from the outside, is somewhat traditional, and there is a lot of slow, hand-done pattern making, draping, and the impact of COVID has been that everyone has had to hurry up a lot faster than they were planning, and we're absolutely seeing that in what's being shown for Fashion Week.
But that talks to the craft of our industry, and I think too that that's the same for floral and florists alike, because ultimately there is a craft that's there, and it's that love and passion that you hone over decades to understand how to position yourself in the marketplace. And I think that that notion of we're sharing, that we can see our industry, our fashion weeks are very much our shop window, so that we can, as many people as possible can see where we are right now and what we have to offer in the forthcoming 6 months. So it's really interesting to hear. That's a big jump to go from orchestrating 160 shows to bring that down to 40. There's a lot of learning there for us. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what that is. And again, it talks to innovation, which is actually why we're having this conversation in the first place. Who knew that that would be the direction of innovation in January of this year? And the speed in the direction. And I think what we can see is that it's talking to all of the three priorities in our industry. It's talking to sustainability, it's talking to digitization, but it's also talking to the issues of diversity, inclusivity, and equity. And I know that that's something you have done a lot of, Anne, too. And I think I would like to open up the conversation about innovation with our audience here, to really share just how we are looking at that responsibility within our business model and how we can be innovative.
Speaking specifically to what I'm hearing from my network here professionally, innovation can be looked at in many, many ways. I think an example of innovation within the industry can be looked at in terms of what are consumers spending, what categories of products maybe didn't exist 6 months ago that now are huge. So for example, PPE, personal protective equipment, and we might think of that a year ago, I would have said, well, that has nothing to do with fashion, right? But the innovation is you go to any fashionable website, Saks, Nordstrom, Shopbop, every single one of them is selling masks. Now they're selling mask accessories, mask chains. Oh, I put my mask inside a scrunchie. Now they're selling bags for your masks. There's printed disposable masks. The intersection of public health and fashion is a category that didn't exist. Now, fashion and technology, smart apparel, all that, but now here's another iteration of that category, and innovation within a previously, non-existent space is just an example of how the fashion industry continues to intersect in an interdisciplinary way with other areas that we might not have even considered in the past. Obviously, the country is going through a huge social justice moment, right? And so I think, unlike times in the past, momentum here, I believe, is going to last. And fashion brands and companies tend to be very accessible to the consumer through social media, through the fact that it's simply something they purchase. They may not purchase, washing machine production machinery. So they may not have as much interest in how that company supports diversity, equity, and inclusion, but within the fashion industry, everyone can access us. So I think it's a really important for brands and companies to assess what are their DEI values, goals, what is their message to their consumer, so that they're authentic, because that aligns exactly with what Lauren mentioned about, especially Gen Z. They will be thoughtful about where they spend their money. So it's an important thing that's happening in the industry right now that can't be done in a trivial way. And then in turn, obviously it's important, it's happening within the school because, we work closely with industry and we want to align with what we're doing.
But I'd like to pick up on that, perhaps in an indirect way, if I may, Anne, because one of the strengths, now this is literally the first week of my second year at Kent State University as director of the School of Fashion. And the first year was very insightful. One of the biggest observations that I think we're humble with is actually just the diversity of students within our school. And I think there's the work that we do in the context of digital technology, and also how we can be having new conversations with the tech industry. Because I think that there is a whole range of issues. Yes, we have issues in terms of fashion, to have a look at just how can we become more equitable and more inclusive of how we do things, but also how we can put a hand out to say to other industries that, you know, we can be part of your solution. You might not have considered fashion as part of your future solution, but let us share a little bit about what we do and how we do it and who our students are, because they potentially are your future employees. And so I can't help think that that's something too for the floral industry to have a look at, because the basis of what both our industries do is about creativity. It's about tapping into the imagination. It's about working with your hands. It's about the emotional. It's about the sensorial. And that skill set and that intelligence has a lot of leverage in different places. So I just want to invite everyone in on this to say, how do we do things differently? How do we begin promoting just the diversity that is our school by nature? We have a responsibility to extend that, but we also don't want to just extend it in terms of numbers, but in terms of quality relations with industry and new industry partners at that.
Representation matters. So really looking at everything that is consumer facing, outward facing from the school, that we use that filter of, am I using inclusive images of students and faculty and staff? Am I using inclusive language when I'm referring to people? So I think that, especially within our social media, because we have a strong social media presence, I think that's the first step to demonstrate to potential partners or potential future students or international students that that's who we are, that we are who we say we are. Of course, that's not enough. That's the first step, right? I think then the next step is also, are we supporting our alumni or industry partners, especially right now at this time of color? Are we featuring them? Are we leaning into interacting with them or partnering with them or inviting them to be a critic or something of that nature, or building relationships where they have internship kind of pathways, things like that. So I think leaning into those are potential steps that we can take in the short term.
We know that within education and fashion education, but also within the industry, we're having to pivot on each of those at the same time, rather than one politely following the other. And that for us, that's new. And it's enormous. It's a paradigm change for us in education and the industry. And I suspect that too is something that is familiar with the floral industry, is that we're used to doing one thing and attending to it. Now we're asked to do three things. And again, that by nature is going to demand that we keep doing things differently. So that step change that we have experienced in the last 5 months, that some people say is what normally takes 5 years.
I think, to your point, Louise, the definition of sustainability has also changed. So we have done a lot with sustainability. I almost think that it's sort of embedded now in what we do in fashion education and industry, when we think of it in the more literal terms, like I use recycled fabric, or I use organic cotton. I watch my water reduction, my chemical usage. I'm thinking about the waste my product creates, or I'm also trying not to support fast fashion, which is very important to Gen Z. But I think what has happened in the last 6 months, to your point, is the impact of digitization and sustainability colliding. It's also way beyond that, sort of in our practices. Like now in the fashion industry, working from home, it will obviously never replace us coming together in meetings, but I'm already hearing about companies. Hugo Boss is suggesting that going forward, that there will be 3 in-office days and 2 out-of-office days, which supports sustainability of, transportation and exhaust and work-life balance. There's a lot, as we move to digitization, of move towards 3D, right, within fashion design, kind of what Linda touched on. And 3D design means that I don't have to have 30 samples. I might only have to have 10 real samples. So there's a lot of sustainability impact in the amount of consumption, money spent, all those things. And a best practice in terms of time. You've also saved time for the process. So I think our kind of outlook and what we consider sustainable has also been impacted by what's happened to the world recently.
But I don't know about you, but I miss you. I miss the people. I miss this those interstitial moments where you sort of meet up, or the unexpected conversation that happens, the sparks that fly when you have a conversation in the corridor or within the kitchen, within the workplace that's there, or going shopping, the physicality of actually moving and going into a space. Perhaps that's just the traditionalist in me that will always love physically being engaged with conversation. And I think the social act of living in life itself, and I think fashion and florals do that, because they're meant to be shared. And so I hear all the positive sides of technology and how it's taking us forward. But I don't think we can demit the responsibility of the interaction and making sure that we are there for people and they are human beings. And so the ask of us as we go forward is actually, how do we make sure that we nurture each other's soul and we have happy hearts and happy minds with everything else? Because ultimately creativity and the imagination, it needs that. That's the food that it needs to keep it going, to nurture it, to push it, to be bold, to do things differently, to step outside the comfort zone, to take that leap of faith when actually everything around about you says, maybe not today, but you say, no, it has to be today, because without today, we can't make tomorrow's next step. And without that next step, we can't be that innovative, that pioneering organization that we have the capacity to be. And so that for us is a responsibility that we take on in this next academic year, that bold thought might be quite small, but it will be enormous if we look back in 12 months' time and say we didn't take it. And so when it comes to just our responsibility of sustainability, what are the key questions we have to be asking? How do we inspire our young minds to push us to be better educators, to be better people when we're with each other? But allow them to teach us about how to use technology. That is one of the joys, that it's a real leveler when it comes into just using technology, because everyone, irrespective of what level of the organization you're in, has to be told, you're on mute, you need to unmute. And that's wonderful, because you then say, actually, you see the human being behind that label. And that, I think, is going to afford us a lovely open space that we didn't have before. And that removes the hierarchy of the model that actually, the traditional model that was there, that did and does hold us back. And I think when it comes to inclusivity and equity, my word, what a summer we've had. There is nothing that can actually diminish the voices, the words, the passion, the care, the love, the responsibility that we now have within fashion education that must do things differently. And so what does that mean? What is the business of fashion tomorrow? How do we reimagine together? How do we invite people in so it's a collective vision?
I think it has to be flexible. It has to be collaborative. You have to be able to adapt quickly when these situations happen, which apparently they can happen. And so we have to be able to make sure that we're prepared, that we're thinking about the future, and we're making sure that our students are prepared and able to adapt to these types of situations and still be creative and still be curious and still have a solid foundation of which they can spring from.
And yeah, same thing. I think we have to be open to change as well. A lot of things that we have to shift and change. And like Lauren said, we have to be flexible and accept those changes for better future. So I think we have to have an open mind, and we also need to listen to each other. And I think customer also look for personalization. Maybe we cannot make it everything automatic. We need to have some human personal touch in our product in some way, and we need to educate our students how to do that.
I also think, thinking of the future and looking to what the consumer needs, and this is maybe a little narrower viewpoint of it, but everything in our consumer's life has changed in every way. Their job, their children's school, every single thing. It's a still ongoing chaotic time, right? We don't know what's happening with schools tomorrow. So it's hard to anticipate what they want, but overall, couple major things, I think, and I read a lot of trend and like what's happening. And I was a designer for a long time, so I still pay attention to all those things. The home has become incredibly important, right? So products related to the home, cooking, decor, renovations, games and hobbies. So that's where they might be looking to spend their money. When it comes more to like traditional fashion trend, obviously the impact of Zoom culture, it probably won't go away as some companies continue to allow working from home, and maybe education potentially becomes a little more online even after things are back to normal. And what is the impact on what people spend their money on? We're already seeing in a huge way people are spending more money on tops and shirts, on athleisure wear, because they're in a more casual workspace. And even literally, we touched on makeup, but makeup probably will shift more towards eyeshadow because you're on a camera. And maybe when you wear a mask, you won't wear as much lipstick, and earrings become a bigger seller. The other big part of that I've seen is because of all the uncertainty is there is a big uptick in wellness and self-care, which is obviously adjacent to the fashion industry. People are looking at spa products. In terms of literal trend, I just read a report about how zodiac and mystical and crystal products are so popular. Literal, I want to buy crystals, or I want a t-shirt with a crystal on it because they're soothing and they're calm, and people are looking for products in every category that will bring joy or peace or serenity to them in sort of this time. And that there may be an impact, I think, on sort of that as an overarching trend of the next 5 years in terms of what people want out of their products, which is obviously super relevant to what happens in the fashion industry, really, because what are flowers if not something to bring you joy?
I was listening to Simon Sinek yesterday he was talking about The Infinite Game, which is really his new published works. And he talks about the why and giving real purpose, real meaning to everyone's everyday lives that's there. And he talked to your points, and Lorne, about just timings and how the week is now spread out. So the tradition was 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And in fashion industry, it was actually you work as long as it takes for as long as it takes. That's within there. And he's saying, actually, it's less of a marathon, this new business model. He can see that there's what's called the 3, 2, and 2. 3 days intense, 2 days off, and 2 days with the family. And so again, that's a culture shift and a mindset shift in terms of managing expectations, because it's ingrained with us, certainly my generation, to really be working flat out for 5 days a week. And so the notion that actually your business can run as successfully with an intensive 3 days and then have genuine intensive days off of rest, then with the family, and then you come back and then you repeat again, or you have 2 weeks intensive on, then 2 weeks fully off. That for our industry and of fashion and of education, wow, that's a really interesting paradigm to consider. But what did you take from today?
I think it was a really good experience for us to come here together to think about what we are facing and how we can look into the future and how we can educate our students in a different way, overcoming all the difficulties and challenges we are facing. So I thought it was a really great opportunity for us to come together. And yeah, when were we going to have time to have this kind of conversation? I love to share what we have here with our students, our faculty, colleagues. Maybe I like how Louis said, let's take a pause and think about what we can do, the quality-wise excellence. And I think this is a time for us to do that pause and think through what we are going through, and then how we can overcome and looking into a better, bright future. I think I'm becoming very positive having this conversation today. Brighter future. A lot of news coming through was not very pleasant last 6 months, but I'm very hopeful. And I think we are, as our fashion educators, we are adapting to change really well, and we know what's coming, and we know how to adapt. And I'm really proud of my colleague right here who shared their ideas and information.
we know, or we think we know, just what excellence is and what innovation is within our field. And yet COVID broke things. And we have to acknowledge that one thing that has challenged is actually just that benchmark of excellence that we have hung on to really dearly. And so how will we allow ourselves to let go a little, and sometimes a lot, from that security of knowing, and then just have to be curious to ask again, what does that mean in today's world? What does excellence look like in the context of sustainability? What does it look like in terms of equity and the language we use for leading our business that's there? Or when it comes to using digital tools or digitization, either within the material engineering that underpins the fashion design, or within the retailing technology that drives the business that is fashion. It's taken me to this stage in my career to actually just to be able to relax into messing things up, or it not being exactly the way that the plans turned out. And so relaxing into a state of chaos is quite a high-end thing to do. And yet we've all been asked to do that so intensely over the last 8 months, and to continue doing that. And so I think that we should take courage, knowing that we've actually been able to do that high-end skill. And how do we now take that experience and allow us to propel us forward?
I would add that as I kind of think about this conversation and thinking about the questions, that someone that I used to work for many years ago said his favorite quote was, "The only thing constant in fashion is change," right? And he usually said that to us when we had a tough meeting, or a shirt wasn't selling, or something literal. But I think it really applies to what has happened to us in the last 6 months, both in education and the industry. And I think there have been a lot of changes, and that, as Lauren mentioned, if you're flexible, that we're going to learn from these changes and come out stronger. And I think I am cautiously optimistic that things are getting better. As Kim mentioned, I think I live in New York. New York is obviously a fashion capital of the world. New York City is slowly coming back to life. People are going back into their offices. I'm hearing things about alumni getting hired or getting new jobs. So I think we're coming out of this smarter, maybe more flexible, maybe more comfortable in chaos. But I am feeling like optimistic.
I think what we're seeing is that from the individual to an academic institution to a major corporation to a small business, you have to use the power of the brand. You have to look at the credibility, the quality, and the experience associated with that brand, because that's going to outlive any product that is on the market today. And so as educators, we have a brand for the fashions or the school fashion. And so we have to make sure that that's as strong as it can be, so that it can outlive things like global pandemics.
Yeah. Well, professors, thank you very much, I think, for the conversation we've had this afternoon, and for what is to continue after this today. So my thanks again. So let me wrap up this fascinating conversation that really gives you an insight into our world in terms of being fashion and what it means to be a responsible fashion educator, looking at just the industry itself, the business, the innovation, the changes, and also just how we will responsibly go forward. We know that fashion is a $3 trillion industry. It's international. We know that from across the whole spectrum of fashion, 1 in 5 people are working within fashion itself. That's a huge responsibility. It's also a wonderful opportunity. There are 2 things that come to our mind in terms of the future potential with connecting more closely between fashion and the Floral Expo. And that really is the natural pollination that can occur between fashion and florals, but also the engineering that has to be done too, in terms of just being quite purposeful with the partnership, purposeful with the people, looking at the teams, and responsibly attending to the shared issues of sustainability, of digitization, and of inclusivity, equity, and diversity. We share those responsibilities. We want to understand how to do those better, and we understand that we will do that better together. So our thanks for the invitation, our thanks for the opportunity, and we look forward to questions and future conversation.